My name is Celestine Vautry, and I am 92 years old. I wake up every morning at 6:15 without an alarm. I make my own coffee, dark roast, 2 spoons, no sugar. And I sit by the window in my kitchen and watch the birds argue over the feeder I hung on the oak tree 17 years ago. Then I do my stretches, eat my breakfast, and get on with my day. Nobody helps me do any of that. No nurse, no aide, no orderly in rubber-soled shoes knocking on a door that isn't really mine, asking me if I've had my morning medication in a voice usually reserved for small children and golden retrievers. I live in my own home. I make my own choices. I go to bed when I want, eat what I want, and wear what I want, which, for the record, is almost never anything beige. And I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. 4 years ago, my family tried to put me in one of those places, not because I was sick, not because I had fallen or forgotten my name or confused my granddaughter for a stranger. They tried to put me in a nursing home because I had turned 88, my husband Bertrand had just passed, and they were scared. They were scared, and that fear, I understand this now, looked a lot like love. But it wasn't love that was driving the decision. It was convenience, dressed up in concern, and I almost let them do it. I want to tell you what changed my mind, because the story is not what you expect. It does not begin with a dramatic revelation or a heroic moment of clarity. It begins with a Tuesday afternoon, a manila folder, and a number so large I had to read it 3 times before I believed it. Bertrand and I had been married for 61 years when he died. He was a quiet man, a civil engineer who liked crossword puzzles and underripe pears, and the collected works of a Norwegian playwright most people have never heard of. We were not wealthy. We were careful. We saved. We paid off the house in a small town in the northern part of the state, the kind of town where people still wave at you from their driveways, and the hardware store has been run by the same family since the Eisenhower administration. When Bertrand got his diagnosis, a degenerative condition affecting his balance and coordination, we made a decision together. We would keep him home. We would adapt the house. Grab bars in the bathroom, a ramp at the side door, a hospital bed in the room we had always called the sunroom because of the big south-facing windows. We hired a part-time aide, a woman named Odessa, who came 3 mornings a week and was, in my estimation, one of the most competent and dignified people I have ever encountered. Bertrand died at home in the sunroom on a Thursday morning in April, with the windows open and the sound of the neighbor's lawnmower in the distance, which he would have found both ordinary and exactly right. That was 14 months before my children sat me down at the kitchen table with the manila folder. My daughter Philippa is a woman of tremendous organizational energy. She had done her research. She had printed out brochures, comparison charts, star ratings from various government websites, and a handwritten list of questions she intended to ask at tours. She had visited 3 facilities within driving distance. She had spoken to a social worker and a geriatric care specialist and, I believe, a real estate attorney, though I never fully understood that part. She slid the folder across the table to me and said, "Mom, we just want you to be safe." I remember looking at the folder and thinking, this is not about safety. Safety is a deadbolt and a medical alert bracelet and a neighbor who has your spare key. This folder is about something else. But I didn't say that. I said I would look at it, and I did look at it. I read every page. I looked at the photographs of smiling residents playing board games in sunlit common rooms and eating what appeared to be quite decent-looking food. I read the section on individualized care plans and resident-centered programming and community engagement opportunities. And then I found the page with the costs. The facility Philippa had ranked as her first choice, the one with the nicest photographs and the highest star rating, charged $9,400 a month for a standard private room. $9,400 per month. I put the folder down. I picked up a pen and I did the math on the back of an envelope, the way Bertrand taught me, because he always said that numbers you write down with your own hand are the only numbers you can trust. $9,400 multiplied by 12 months is $112,800 per year. The average American woman who reaches 65, I had read somewhere, can expect to live into her mid-80s. I was 88. Let us assume generously that I had 5 years left, which would mean, I wrote the number down, $564,000. $500,000, more than $500,000, for a room in a building full of people who did not know me, who had not chosen me as a neighbor, who could not tell you that I take my coffee dark, or that I have a particular inability to tolerate the smell of synthetic lavender, or that the thing I love most in the morning is the arguing birds. And I thought, for that number, I could do almost anything else. Here is what I did instead. I did not do it alone. And I want to be honest about that, because I think one of the great dishonest things about these conversations is the idea that independence means solitude. It does not. Independence means that the choices are yours. The people around you can be part of the plan. They just can't be the ones holding the pen. The first thing I did was call my neighbor Ozymandias. Yes, that is his real name. His mother was a literature professor with strong opinions, who is 74 years old and a retired architect. Ozzy had been redesigning houses for decades. I asked him if he would walk through my home with me and tell me what it needed to be safe and livable for the next decade. He came over the following Saturday with a yellow legal pad and a measuring tape. We spent 4 hours going through every room. He made a list. It was longer than I expected and shorter than I feared. The structural changes, wider doorways in the bathroom and bedroom, a roll-in shower, better lighting in the hallway, a no-step entry at the front door, came to just under $31,000, including labor. I hired a local contractor named Vasilis, who had done work on the house before and who, more importantly, was someone I trusted to tell me the truth about what was load-bearing and what wasn't. While the renovations were happening, I made a second call to a woman I had met only once at a church potluck 6 or 7 years earlier, whose name was Sophronia, and who had, at that potluck, told me she worked in elder care advocacy. I had kept her card in the little wooden box on my desk, where I keep things I think I might someday need. Sophronia came over for tea, and we talked for 3 hours. She told me things nobody had told me before. She told me about the network of home care coordinators in our region, about the difference between custodial care and skilled nursing care, and which one most people actually need most of the time, about the geriatric care managers who could help me build a formal support plan that I controlled, and about the legal documents, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare directive, a detailed personal statement of preferences that would protect my choices if I ever reached a point where I couldn't speak for myself. She also told me, very gently, but without any softening of the numbers, what the research actually says about outcomes in nursing facilities versus home-based care for older adults who are not medically complex. The research is not kind to the facilities. It is not kind to them on measures of depression, on measures of cognitive decline, on measures of infection rates, and, perhaps most surprisingly, to people who assume that nursing homes are safer. It is not kind to them on certain measures of fall rates either, because falls in institutional settings happen for reasons that are specific to institutional settings. Unfamiliar environments, nighttime disorientation, understaffed overnight shifts. I am not saying all facilities are bad. I am saying the story we are told, that moving to one of those places is the responsible, safe, loving choice, is not as clear as it is presented. It is a story shaped, at least in part, by an industry with a considerable financial interest in the telling of it. This is where the tension in my story lives, and I want to stay here for a moment, because I don't want to make it sound easier than it was. After Sophronia left, I called Philippa. That conversation was one of the hardest I have ever had. Not because she was cruel, she wasn't. Not because she was wrong to be worried, she wasn't entirely. It was hard because she was operating from a kind of fear that I recognized, a fear I had carried myself when my own mother was aging. And I knew from the inside how real that fear feels and how certain it makes you of your conclusions. I told her what I had decided. I told her about the renovations, about the care coordinator I was going to hire, about the legal documents Sophronia had helped me understand. I told her I was going to build a plan, a real plan, with contingencies and named decision makers, and a clear process for reassessment if my situation changed. I told her that plan would protect her too, because it would mean she was never in the position of making decisions without guidance from me. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What if something happens when you're alone?" And I said, "Philippa, something could happen when I'm surrounded by people. Something happened to your father when Odessa was in the next room. We don't get to prevent the thing from happening. We get to build the life we want to be living when it does." She cried. I let her. I did not cry because I had already cried about it alone in the sunroom the week before, looking out the windows Bertrand had loved. And I had decided that I was done grieving the future and going to start living it instead. Let me tell you what my life looks like now at 92. I have a geriatric care manager, a woman named Hildegard, who I think is one of the sharpest people I have ever met, who coordinates my care. She is not my boss. She is my consultant. We talk every 2 weeks, and she does a formal assessment every 6 months. If something changes, she's the first call. I have a home health aide who comes 5 mornings a week. Her name is Tessely, and she is 31 years old and from a country I won't name because she values her privacy. She helps me with bathing, which became necessary about 18 months ago, and with some of the heavier housekeeping. She also has strong opinions about reality television, which I find both baffling and entertaining, and we discuss them with great enthusiasm while she folds my laundry. I have a grocery delivery service and a meal kit service for the nights I don't feel like cooking, which is more nights than it used to be, but fewer nights than people seem to assume. I have a neighbor, not Ozzy, a different one, a younger woman named Erzsébet, who moved in 3 years ago, who has my spare key and my emergency contact information, and who checks in on me without making a production of it, which I appreciate more than I can say. I have a tablet that I learned to use at 89 because Ozzy sat at this kitchen table every Tuesday afternoon for 6 weeks until I understood it. I video call my grandchildren. I read the newspaper. I watch an occasionally alarming amount of nature documentaries. And I have my home, my coffee, my birds. The total monthly cost of everything I just described, the care manager, the aide, the groceries, the meal kits, the various services and subscriptions and adaptive equipment, is approximately $3,200 a month. Compare that to $9,400. The difference over 5 years is more than $370,000. That money is still mine. Part of it will go to my grandchildren. Part of it has funded a small scholarship at the community college in memory of Bertrand. He would have found that both embarrassing and secretly wonderful. The rest is a cushion, a freedom, a proof that planning and clear thinking are more powerful than fear. I have been thinking about why we don't talk about this more. Why the conversation about aging tends to collapse into a binary. Either you are managing fine and no one needs to worry, or something has tipped and the solution is a facility, with very little examination of the vast and navigable territory in between. Part of it, I think, is that we have built a culture in which aging is treated primarily as a logistical problem to be solved, rather than a chapter of life to be lived. The people making the decisions about older adults are often younger adults who are frightened and tired and operating under enormous practical pressure. The systems that exist to support aging, insurance, Medicare, the healthcare apparatus generally, are not designed around the question of what a good life looks like. They are designed around the question of what a manageable liability looks like. I understand this. I am not angry about it. But I think it is important to name it clearly because you cannot navigate a system without understanding what that system is actually optimizing for. And I can tell you, with the clarity of someone who has spent 92 years watching the way things work, that the nursing home industry is not optimizing for your grandmother's quality of life. It is optimizing for occupancy rates and liability management and the convenience of people who are not your grandmother. Which does not mean that every person who works in those facilities is indifferent or unkind. Most of the people who work in direct care in any setting are doing profoundly difficult and undercompensated work with genuine dedication. This is a structural argument, not an individual one. Here is what I want to say to anyone who is in the position my children were in 4 years ago. Your fear is real. Your love is real. Both of those things are true, and neither of them is the same as being right about the solution. Before you sign anything, before you visit any facilities, before you have any conversation with a social worker employed by a facility with a financial interest in a particular outcome, go and talk to a geriatric care manager who works independently, not one affiliated with a facility system, an independent one. Ask them to do an assessment. Ask them to tell you honestly what level of care is actually needed and what options exist for delivering that care. Then do the math. Get the actual numbers. Write them down with your own hand. And then, if the person you love is capable of participating in the conversation, and you may be surprised by how capable they are, because we have a remarkable cultural tendency to underestimate the cognitive clarity of older adults. Have the conversation with them, not at them, with them. Ask them what matters. Ask them what they're afraid of. Ask them what a good Tuesday looks like. Because a good Tuesday, coffee, birds, laundry conversation, perhaps a nature documentary, is what we're actually talking about. That is the thing worth protecting. And here is what I want to say to anyone who is my age or close to it, and who has been sitting quietly while other people make plans about you. You are allowed to be the one holding the pen. I know it can feel easier to let it happen, to let people who love you make the decisions, to step back from the energy it takes to assert yourself when assertion has started to feel like conflict, and conflict has started to feel exhausting. I know that feeling. There were many days in the months after Bertrand died when the path of least resistance had a kind of terrible appeal. But here is what I know at 92 that I did not know at 50 or 60 or even 70. The energy you spend advocating for your own life is not wasted energy. It is the most important energy you have. It is the thing that keeps you yourself. I am not the same woman I was at 50. I am slower. I tire more easily. My knees are, frankly, a diplomatic disaster. But I am fully, completely, recognizably myself. I know what I think. I know what I love. I know what I want my Tuesdays to look like. Nobody in a beige room with a pre-scheduled activities calendar is going to give me that. I built it myself. With help, good, chosen, respectful help, but myself. 4 years ago, my daughter slid a manila folder across my kitchen table and told me she wanted me to be safe. Last month, Philippa came to visit for a long weekend. We sat in this kitchen, my kitchen, with my coffee and my view of my oak tree and my arguing birds. And we talked for hours the way we used to, when she was in her 20s and I was a woman who seemed to her to have all the answers. We talked about Bertrand. We talked about her own fears about getting older. We talked about what a good life looks like and how you know when you're living one. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and looked at me for a long moment. She said, "You were right, Mom." I said, "I usually am." She laughed, which was the point. Then she got in her car and drove back to her own life, and I went back to mine. And the birds were still there, still arguing, exactly where I had left them. I am 92 years old. I am completely, stubbornly, joyfully here, and I have no intention of going anywhere. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think differently about a conversation you've been avoiding, or gave you words for something you already knew, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your situation. Tell me what you're facing. Tell me about your Tuesday. This channel exists because these conversations matter. And I believe they matter more than almost anything else we could be talking about. Subscribe if you want more of them. We're just getting started.